Welcome everyone to Fête de la Science 2021, Pesta Sains. We are so pleased to welcome you today. I hope everyone stays safe during this pandemic. We are so happy to do this event this year. We would like to welcome you in our institute in Indonesia. I hope it will be soon, in whether it is in Jakarta, Bandung, Yogyakarta, Medan, Surabaya, and Bali. So stay connected for our future events that will hopefully take place soon. So tonight we are so pleased to welcome Elizabeth Inandiak, Sarah Andrieux, and Baba Punto Wijayanto for this first edition, for this first webinar of Pesta Sains. Tonight we're going to talk about natural risks in Indonesia, and especially how to reconstruct and how people locally in their cultures have manners to handle these risks. Before we start our presentations, we are so happy to welcome Stéphane Dover. Stéphane Dover is director of the Institut Français Indonesia, Institut Français, and also our French counselor for cooperation in our French embassy. Thank you, Stéphane, for being with us tonight to celebrate science.
Thank you, Gauthier. So welcome everyone. Let's start by a little bit of facts and figures. Fête de la Science has been organized by the French Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation for the last 30 years already. This event was created by a minister, famous minister, I should say, Hubert Curien. Hubert Curien is one of the most famous ministers for science and technology in the last couple of decades, and he has been particularly famous for his good relations with BG, late BG Habibie, and he paid a visit to Indonesia in 1986, accompanying François Mitterrand, the French president of this time. What is the idea of the La Fête de la Science, Pesta Sains? Research and technology is everyone's business. Means that it's not only a question of being a scientist or not being a scientist, but we all rely on science. We all need science. We all use, knowing it or not, science and technology and achievements, what have been done by the scientists, and we take profit of it. Last year, the Fête de la Science has been particularly successful, knowing that in France alone, only almost 5,000 events have been organized, and hundreds and hundreds in the rest of the world as well. More than 500,000 of people have been involved, including in Indonesia. Pesta Sains offers the opportunity to promote scientific culture and to encourage, as I mentioned, the dissemination of scientific knowledge. Fête de la Science is the perfect time to ask all your questions to scientists and for scientists themselves to share with you, with us, their passion. The event is now in its 6 years in Indonesia, starting in 2014. And this year, as it has been mentioned by our moderator, Gauthier, as the topic is on human and natural phenomena in Indonesia, but especially on local knowledge. Before, we will have 3 webinars in the next couple of days. We'll give you the opportunity to discover some of the fascinating scientist projects between Indonesia and French researchers. Precious scientific French institutions are represented and will be represented in the next 3 days. I am proud of the participation of our speakers and partners, especially from the FAO, ERD, and the CIRAD in their respective field. I would like to mention that the scientific cooperation in between France and Indonesia has been a long-lasting story, and it's great to see how much has been achieved. I would like to mention a very, very new book published by After Hours. I try to show you the books. I don't know if it's very clear, not sure. But it's about a corporation. It's a 4 kilograms books. I don't know if you can assess the quality of a book by its weight, but as a matter of fact, it's a very, very heavy one. And it's a kind of recap of what has been achieved for the last 30 years. And it has been published by After Hours and Arqueris in France. And it's now on bookshelves in all the the good bookshops. Pesta Sains this year will be a unique occasion to put science in perspective. Let's enter into the very substance. First of all, we have to always remember that what science has brought to us: health, energy, food, housing, consumptions, technology, resource management, whatever, everything in our daily life and anything that qualifies nowadays humankind is more or less, in a way or another, related to science. And it's still important, even so, to make a kind of advocacies, because fighting against the darkness of ignorance, fighting against obscurantism will always remain crucial. No, Earth is not flat, as a part of the United States population still think. Yes, our planet is just a very small one in the infinity of the universe and not the center of everything. Yes, humankind is a product of the evolution of the species. Yes, we have our destiny in hands if we know how to use it wisely by having science as a guide. Yes, global warming is a fact. No, we are not under threat of the aliens invasion. So it has to be clear, science is a guide, and it still remains a guide. And it's very important because you have some very educated people who tend to lose the track and to lose the habit of thinking that science is crucial. That's also why La Fête de la Science is so important, because it's an advocacy. The scientists themselves, of course, they are convinced, but you have a part of the public that is not enough, and it's an occasion to show how important science is. But if science is crucial to understand, to prevent, and to face natural hazards, because this is the main topic of our Pesta Sains this year, it's not enough. I should say there is a point in science that we tend to underestimate it, is the lack of humility of science. So we have to consider that science, even if it's that crucial, even if it's as important as I mentioned, science is not everything. It's not because you have learned. It's not because you have read in books. It's not because you had experience in leading universities that you know everything. And local wisdoms are very, very important as well. So let's get back within the scientist circles to be a little bit humble toward what people who really live their life in a certain place knows about this place and knows about what happened. Science, I would like to give you 2 examples of the lack of humility of science facing natural hazard and natural problems, great catastrophes. My first example will be from Elisabeth Inandiak, Le Chant de l'Archipel, one of her most recent books, and I suggest you to read it. I try to be in front of my camera. Is it? Yeah, I don't know if it's clear enough. But this is Le Chant de l'Archipel. It's a very small and very inspiring book, despite the fact that it's small. And the example I want to give you from this very book is what happened in Sulawesi on 28th of September 2018. in certain villages of Sulawesi, soil lost its compactness as a consequence of an earthquake. And it was that crucial that 12,000 people have literally sunk into the soil. So the scientists add their explanation, and they come in number with all the weight you have when you are a scientist. You have the knowledge, you are a doctor or something, you are a professor something, you are already founded, you are usually funded and supported by great institutions such as, for instance, French Embassy, or other like the United Nations or others, and you are coming by being the one, pretending to be the one who knows. And those famous scientists came by saying that's what happened here was liquefaction. And of course, it was English, an English word, so people trying to tend to adjust. It's in the book of Elizabeth, and they said, okay, we can maybe translate it into Indonesia. We are scientists from Indonesia, and it can be translated as liquefaxi. And all the person around the villagers and so on say, okay, the scientists say so let's talk about liquefaxi. But what is amazing is to know that, of course, what happened, this liquefaction of the soil, has been, not to say common, very known for ages by the villagers. And in Kaili, the language, the local language, there is a word for that. It's nalodo, means to disappear in the soil, sucked by the mood. So it's very interesting to know that the scientists came by saying, so we will explain you, but people already knew. And they should have been more humble by asking, what do you know about this phenomena? And what could we as scientists learn from you to make our science better and stronger? I am myself, a couple of decades ago, I had my PhD dissertation on West New Guinea. And it's amazing how frequently in Indonesia, as well as in the rest of the world, we consider the people of West New Guinea as backward. Means that they don't know, they are so, Stone Age is a word that you often hear, and they have plenty of taboos. So, taboo is very mystical kind of things for people who don't know what science and things are. For example, I remember that scientists were quite shocked, and the one who were in charge of development were quite shocked because they have a bird, quite big bird, they could have eaten and consumed for its meat, knowing that the lack of protein is a concern. But for some tribes there, it was taboo to consume it. And we say, so it's so irrational. And then one of these days, somebody realized that, in fact, if the consumption of this bird was so taboo, it's because it brought seeds from some trees to others, and it was absolutely crucial to the feeding of the inhabitants. Because if the trees were not and were not enormous in terms of feeding. So those two examples, I'm sorry, I'm not sure that you have heard me well, but those two examples, the one from the Elizabeth book and the one from New Guinea, where taboos were very, very wise and not so supernatural or so unrational, gives us an idea that local knowledge has a lot to say, and that it's not because local knowledge are so wonderful, but it's a part of the scheme, and it's something that we always, as Westerners, as Indonesian scientists, as Indonesian from urban areas, have difficulties to get and to catch. So we are very glad to celebrate Pesta Sains for this time, for 2021 in Indonesia. I wish you 3 wonderful days of seminars this week with you, and I'm so glad. Thank you very much, and please enjoy.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for this perfect introduction to our event and for this particular webinar. As we are going to start now about our presentations, just to remind you of a few rules about the Zoom meetings. Yeah, I'm sure you know all about Zoom meetings now, but just we will just kindly ask you to stay muted during the presentation of our speakers, just so you can fully enjoy the presentation. And of course, if you have questions, just ask them in the chat box. We'll answer them after all our presentations. So feel free to ask them in French, in Bahasa Inggris, in Bahasa Indonesia. So stay tuned, and we are going to start with our first presentation. Stefan started to talk about our first speaker, Elisabeth Inandiak. I have the honor to introduce you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Where to start? But Elisabeth has been living in Indonesia for years. She has notably worked together with locals in the area of Yogyakarta after natural disasters. Stefan showed one of your books. I wanted to mention also your book called Babat and Galon Gidul, which takes place around the Merapi volcano. And tonight, as Elisabeth is going to talk about how she helps locals to reconstruct their villages, and more than infrastructures, she helps reconstructing actually aspects about cultures, spirits. And so we are so pleased to welcome you tonight, Elisabeth.
Thank you so much, Gauthier and Stefan, for this beautiful introduction. So I will show you a PowerPoint, many pictures, because it's more interesting. So I have 15 minutes, or how long? Please tell me when I approach the end. So yes, I'm not an academic, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, I don't know. I'm just a writer who stops writing for several years because I was so much involved with communities in Yogyakarta, struck by the earthquake and the Merapi eruption. So what I'm going to talk is not, it's really what I learned really on the field with the local people, yeah. So I can share screen, yeah. Share screen, share. How do I make, no, it doesn't show. You are screen sharing.
We can see your screen, Elisabeth.
But I don't see mine. This is the problem. I don't see my PowerPoint. How can I just, you are screen sharing. I don't see my my PowerPoint. Oh, yes, here. Okay. So.
Perfect.
So this is the first. Wait. So I gave a new title because the title was Natural Disasters in Indonesia, Prevention, Local Wisdom and Reconstruction. So I call it Local Wisdom as a prevention and a reconstruction tool. So local wisdom, as Stefan said, is very, very important. The problem is that very often it has been forgotten by the people, because the fact in Palu that they forgot about the word Nalodo is that they forgot that liquefaction could happen. So they build up cities, houses on a land that was known by their ancestors as a place for Nalodo. So if they will have remembered the word since many generations, they will never have expanded cities or buildings on this land, you know. So that's why remember words is to remember the tradition, the local knowledge, and is willing to prevent disasters. In one way, of course, there are many entries to prevent disasters, but this is one very important. So just to give you for a few examples, yeah, like in Barus, in the west coast of Sumatra, it is called Gergazi, a monstrous sea creature that in the 12th century is said to have destroyed this prosperous port. In Flores, hit in 92 by a tidal wave, they say, "Ay mesi nuatanalala," the sea is rising, the earth is collapsing. In Aceh, they say Galoro or Alon Alon Buluek, the very voracious wave. And the most famous case is of course in Sumelu Island of Sumatra, where they called smog, and they saved the life of all the people on the island because they remember this word, because they were singing always this word in their oral literature, known as Nandong. And this was called like that when the earth shakes, followed by the retreat of the sea, run up the hill, because here comes the smog. And when the tsunami happened in 2004, almost all the islanders were saved. This is a very famous case. And from this case, so this is about Palu, you know. I've been in Aceh, by the way. This is where I was just a few days after. With Metro TV, I came as a volunteer, and they asked me to help to collect the corpse. So, and here, this is in Palu, in a village. And we help also the village to rebuild the market. So that's, but I haven't been there, but we were working with the post, how do you call it, post from the students from this region. And that's how I learned more about, yes, this Nalodo, but also the word for tsunami. And they have a word, it's called Bombatalu. And when Yusuf Kala, so this is the market we rebuilt, and when Yusuf Kala came a few weeks after the tsunami and the earthquake in Palu to check why the detection buoys did not work, you know, as an alarm for tsunami. This is what he said. I changed a little bit his word, but this is almost the same. The Japanese have them too, but that didn't prevent the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami from killing 15,000 people. So stop using the alert app on your cell phone and stop waiting for the siren. Do like the islanders of Sumelu, cultivate your local traditions. So it doesn't mean that you should not believe the science, yes, but in certain case, if you trust too much the science, and if the technology doesn't work, it can bring disasters as well. So you have to keep them both. In fact, it was a little bit extreme at that time because the damage was so big. Maybe it was moved, but this is one of the. That was his words at the time. Very, very surprising, because Yusuf Kala is a very scientist, very rational person. Yeah. So so it's very strange that he said such words. Here I show you a picture of the Merapi Labuhan, yeah, tradition, offering tradition. Mbak Marijan was still alive at the time, the Churukunchi. And this is one case I've been very much involved, of course, in the village of Kinarjo, the sacred village on the slope of the Merapi, where Marijan used to live. And I could see the deprivation of local knowledge. And local knowledge was disappearing because of development, because of fundamental Islam, and preventing to believe in certain things. But also the villagers were defiant towards the science, the volcanologists. They didn't believe the archaeologists, so they lost both, you know. And when the eruption came in 2010, none of them have seen the eruption coming. The only one that saw it very clearly were the volcanologists, yeah. And Mabarijan refused to leave. In the meantime, not only the local knowledge was destroyed by fundamentalist believing, but also by, we can say, capitalist power who entered the village and who bought the image of Mamarijan for make an advertisement, Kukubima, and as a super powerful man guarding the volcano, and finally he died. It's very sad ending. Yeah. So this is one of the example of the collapse of the local knowledge. Yeah, because for example, one of the way to know if that an eruption was coming, and there were eagles, big eagles flying around up the mountain, the volcano mountain. But the eagles have disappeared because there are no more birds, so they had no signs anymore. But also because they forgot their own traditions. Yeah. So this is a mixture of the change of nature, the religious development, modernization, and people stop to cultivate their own culture. Yeah. So very sad story. So this is what we did in Kinarjo afterwards. We built many things, but I'm not going to talk about Kinarjo village. I'm going to, as a case example, to take the village of Bebekan. So after the earthquake in 2006, in Bantul, south of Yogyakarta. So I call it down to earth actions with earthquake survivors. So many pictures. This is Bebekania. It means the village of the bebek of the. So they made this flag. They didn't have this flag before, but we made it together as we revived just after the earthquake their local culture. So this is the village that was invisible from the road. So there was almost no aid coming because people, the NGO, or they didn't know there was a village behind those trees. And this is the day where this is one of the ruins of the village. So first, I think what I learned, this is all what I learned. Yeah, this is not theory that I made up. No, this is like theories that I made up after what I've learned. Yeah. So they are not victims but survivors, sovereign over the land. This is very important. Don't look at survivors of natural disasters as victims. And this is, didn't want and must, not only in Bebekan, but must in the area of Yogyakarta. Some NGO came and built up big camps so they will move, but almost no villagers moved from their village. They wanted to stay in the village, to guard their belongings, the few things that were not destroyed, to take care of their rice field, and to rebuild temporary shelters to be able to survive. So the NGO, some NGOs were not prepared to that, and they wanted to bring the people out, order them. It's easy, suddenly the victims becomes your things, and it's inconscious, but that's what we realized what was happening. No, they are sovereign people, and they are survivors, and they have their own will and their own ideas how to reconstruct themselves. And so this is this about 90% of the houses were destroyed. There were about 500 people living in Bebekan, very poor people with no land, farmers with no land. So another thing I learned is don't ask what they need, but what they wish. This sounds strange, but this is, suddenly I asked them that. I don't know why. I said, what do you wish the best? And they said, we want to make a selamatan. We want to have a dinner together, because they had it every week, because every event, as you know, in Yogyakarta, in the villages, they have still this tradition when there is a birth, a person who died, anything, in a house, all the women gather, they cook, dapur umum, and they make a meal together. And that's what they were missing the most, to be together. That was so important because the earthquake separated them, isolated them. So this is what they were longing for. Okay, so we just sponsored just maybe, I don't know, at the time, maybe 200 euros, I forgot in rupiah. And that was enough to make a big meal, with how many people, all the villagers, And an NGO came, I remember, and they said, how can you make a meal and the people are in rains, because it was all, and whether they were staying at the Hyatt or I don't know what hotel, and one night at the Hyatt was the price of this meal, that brought the people together and make them happy. So, this is also many misunderstanding between people who want to help and they don't help well. And I made also many mistakes, so I can tell about my mistakes myself, but I tell you what I learned, So the other thing is, house of stone, house of soul, reconstruction of the intangible cultural identity. Because when the people lose their houses, they lose everything that is tangible, yeah, material. But it doesn't mean that they have lost their identity, you know. But the problem is, if we don't take care of their identity, they will lose it also, because they lose confidence, they become beggars, victims, and so on. And suddenly, not only they lose their tangible heritage, but also the culture. So this is very important. And I don't know, maybe because I am a writer, an artist myself, just the first day I asked, did you had any arts in the village? And they said, yes, we had reok dance. So immediately, with a few friends that were artists in France and overseas, they sent money, and we could build just a few days after the earthquake all the clothes. They never had such beautiful clothes. You know, in the middle of the rain, it seems absurd, but I knew I had no means to rebuild the village. That was not my task. That was the government task. So what could we do? They had enough food, because the food supplies was coming, and they were still working in the village. So we decided to create again the reok. And I didn't know the effect, but suddenly the trance, they all get in trance very easily. And even the elders were surprised. I said, how can they go so easily in trance? And it seems that the trance was a post-traumatic therapy. But I didn't do that purposely, you know. This is also what we learn, you know, all together. We bought a large size for the school uniform, so they can wear it at least for 2 years, you know, because otherwise it's too expensive. So be practical. The other thing is not helping, but serving. You are not helping, but you are really serving. And this is in my house in the north of Yogyakarta. And I invited all the children to change the atmosphere, because they were living among the ruins. They were depressed. And so we had tents, and they spent a weekend or two at my place. And so it was really very, very important to do things like that are very easy, that you don't need money for that, you know. You just have the spirit of serving the people, listening, what is their problem? Okay, they are depressed because they are in village. Okay, let's invite them to your place, and changing the atmosphere. Yeah. So this is at my house. They were praying at night. The other thing is interdependence, interconnection, because just before the earthquake, the Merapi was very active. Everyone was thinking that the Merapi will have an eruption. And finally, there was the earthquake in the south. But then there was a problem with the sand, because in the south, they needed a lot of sand to rebuild the houses. And the Merapi had vomited a lot of sand. But then there were big companies coming, crashing all the rivers on the Merapi, and it started to become an environmental disasters, and also human disasters, economical, because the villagers who were taking the sand in a very natural way, they had no means, they were pushed on the side. So we've been working together, we've been aware of this problem, thanks to pesantren, Al-Qadir, and the Merapi. And we decided that we have also to help the villagers to fight the case against the big companies to stop the industrial dragging of the sand on the Merapi. So you see how interconnection also, you not just be focused on one place, but take a holistic and a larger view. Then talk and act. Never promise more than you can do. So this is also a very good lesson, because sometimes we talk, and the people are disappointed. So I always talk less. I said, we will help you less. And finally, we had more. So then people were very happy. So they were living, you know, in those shelters that they build themselves. We put the terpal and so on. But then the rain season was coming, and the help to rebuild the houses will take at least 1 year. Not at least, it took 1 year. The government was very efficient, I must admit. But in the meantime, during the monsoon, it's impossible that they stay in those houses. So with the villagers, especially with the man who was doing the mask, who is an artist, he drew the basic plan to make temporary houses, and, you know, using all what they have collected that was safe. Some tiang, some tiles, and we counted every house, what was left and how much we needed to buy. So we just bought what we needed. So it costed very, very few money, not much. I forgot the amount. I think it was like 8,000 euro to rebuild 90 houses, not to rebuild, to make temporary houses like that. So they can wait patiently, not fighting each other for the turn to get a new house. You know, that was also very important for the mutual atmosphere, mutual friendship between them. So no cash money, but gotong royong, yeah, community self-help. So because some ONG brought some money and they would pay the people to rebuild the house. And we said, no, you will do that yourself, but still we were paying we found some money to pay the carpenters who were working at night, but we brought all the workshop on one place, so then they could work efficiently, yeah, in the evening. So they could still work in the day for their own living, yeah. And that was very efficient, you know. They clean up the ruins of a house. We just, when I say we, it was the villagers and a friend and mine, an Indonesian friend and mine, Asep Wijaya, that is now living in France. They will clean the ruins of the house. The money they will get is the food. We will give maybe 3-4 euros for the woman to cook the food for all the workers. And then they will build the structures, the wood, put the tiles, you know, so the people were still living under if it was raining or very sunny. And then within a day, that was finished, you know, that was done. So within 2 months, we could rebuild 90 houses like that, temporary houses, more than shelters. And very important, transparency. We had always meetings and we showed them all the cost and who got this and that and that. That's another thing, very important, because jealousy comes very, very quick, you know, after the reconstruction starts. After the trauma, instant trauma, then people start to look right and left what the neighbor got. And then jealousy comes back, you know, as before, mungkin, yeah, maybe. And then it's good to have a dream. It seems impossible. This was a house that was totally collapsing. It used to be a school, kindergarten, yeah, or pouch, but it was not used anymore, and it was on a piece of land that belonged to a person who disappeared in Sumatra at the Suharto time, and after he had been deported by the Japanese, so it's a tragedy, and he never returned. And so we could use his land. So the artist, the mass sculpture, this drawing, and then we received the help of Carrefour, who just settled in Georgia at the time, and they gave us the funds to build a pendopo and a rumah limasan for artist residence, and so. And again, this was an occasion to the togetherness, to make a ceremony, to the first stone, yeah, foundation stone. So always togetherness is very important. Don't miss any traditional ceremony that brings them together. And we call the Sangar Girigi no Guno, the hill of great value and benefit. And we developed creative cooperation between culture and agriculture, education, microeconomics, environment, and local wisdom. And that was a lot of work. So there were dance and so on.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I just didn't want to interrupt you, as it is really fascinating. I just wanted to keep some time for our next speakers, but if you have a word to conclude, maybe?
2 minutes, it's okay? 2 minutes?
Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you.
I thought you would tell me before. So cultivating globality within oneself. So I realized what was amazing in a village, especially in Bencana, but in many villages in Indonesia, they have the gamelan, the Hindu Buddhist tradition, palace tradition. They have the zikir or the hadroh, the Sufi Muslim tradition. And they have the reok trance, you could say the ancestors tradition. And it all goes together, cohabit together within themselves, with no conflict. In many cases, in certain cases, with conflict. And also, we did many other things, so I have no time. But finally, the desk, I want to show that. We worked with the sculpture of mask, and Nicolas César, who works in France as an ethnologist for insects. He orders many masks for the Musée d'Anthropologie, Musée de, I forgot the museum, right to the Eiffel Tower. And it's part of the collection now. So we are very happy with natural colors that these masks are now part of the collection of Le Musée de, I forgot the name. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me. And welcome to the others, people who are going to talk. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this fascinating talk. I'm sure we will have many questions to ask you later on. So don't hesitate to ask them in the chat box, as we will answer them with Elizabeth at the end of the presentations. Thanks again, Elizabeth. We are moving to our second presentation with Dr. Sarah Andrieux. Sarah, we are really glad to have you tonight. Sarah is an anthropologist and she lives in Indonesia. She has worked for years about the cultures and civilizations in Indonesia, and notably about the Wayang Golek. Tonight, Sarah is going to introduce us to how, by reading the past, we can learn about our present thanks to the cultures. And thanks again for being with us tonight, Sarah.
Thank you, Gauthier. Thank you, Gauthier. Good evening, selamat malam. I may share my screen, maybe. Okay, let's go. So thank you very much for inviting me tonight. I must confess I was a bit surprised because I'm not exactly a specialist on disasters and this kind of thing. So I had to figure out what could I bring to this discussion. And I hope that I won't be too far away from the subject. Anyway, I will still remain borderline, of course, but I hope this will retain your interest anyway. Okay, so reading the past to inform the present, performing time and heritage in Sudanese Wayang Golek in West Java. So first I will make a short introduction about what is Wayang Golek, probably. As an information, Wayang refers to a puppet, to the performance using these puppets, and also to the social event at which the performance takes place. So it's an all-encompassing category, actually, where you can have from the smallest detail of the performance to the entire social event that revolves around it. Wayang Golek and my paper today is starting from an anthropological study about the heritagization process of Sudanese Wayang Golek from West Java here in Indonesia. Wayang Golek is a highly popular rock puppet theater we found in the western part of Java among the Sudanese society. So here are the puppets. It's a rock theater puppets. Why is it here? Okay. And then it's always accompanied by gamelan, so a whole collective instruments played by 12 to 18 musicians. On the right side, you can see the dalang, or the puppeteer. And down here, you can see warisan budaya tabenda, because Wayang Golek was part of the Indonesian Wayang as acknowledged by UNESCO as intangible heritage of humanity in 2003, and then back integrated into the representative list of intangible color of humanity in 2008. Wayang in general has a long history and is closely intricated with processes of individual and collective memory in society. However, we can question the relevance of these same categories, such as heritage or memory, as they carry many political, scientific, and economical stakes, among many others, and they are actually quite reducing what Wayang is. As I told you earlier, Wayang is not only a simple detail or a performance or something, it's more than this. It's a social event, it's the part and the whole thing. So we may think of Wayang in terms of memory or heritage, but still it is more than that. For Wayang performance, the audience is very wide. People come without distinction of social class, age, gender, everyone comes and joins. So what about natural disasters in Wayang Golek? Usually they're understood as signs. They have a cosmic origin that can be tracked in divine intervention or reaction to human issues, maybe individual or collective. For example, there is a story called Samar Gugat, where we see the very famous hero. Well, he's not a hero, he's a very ambiguous figure, but his name is Samar anyway, and he's actually the servant of the heroes, and he's going to complain because there are problems in the kingdom, and these problems took the shape of floods. And another lakon or story is named Cepot Kembar. You have the same problem. The flood is coming because you have troubles actually between the people, and basically between the government and the people. The relationship between the people and the government is not good, and usually it takes the shape of natural disaster. You also have natural disaster coming up from specific individual behaviors. For example, Rahwana is a demon king, is categorized as a demon king in the Ramayana. And when he's meditating, for example, when he comes out from his meditation, you can have an earthquake and you can have this kind of manifestation. The same when he dies, he's stuck between two mountains. So actually you can imagine what kind of earth movement it can represent. So actually it is really closely connected to what happens for the humans, or at least the characters in the wayang. And that's why we can talk about the relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm. That means that the wayang is like a small presentation of what is happening in the whole universe. In wayang, the solutions are to be found in the rebalancing of the world through the hero's intervention and through wayang itself. So actually the objective of wayang is mainly to rebalance the world. And so you have the introduction of the wayang story that is about a situation, usually takes place in a palace, and the king is explaining about the concerning situation happening to his kingdom or somewhere else in the world, and the heroes are going to try to find the solution, and the solution will come on the end in the shape of the re-imbalancement of the world, of the relationship between the characters, and so on. So wayang also is a discourse about heritage and time and how to deal with past events. And we can actually see that there are three levels for this in wayang. First, you have the level of the discourse. So wayang delivers messages. These messages are delivered through characters, usually, mainly through the characters of the Panakawan you see on the right side of the screen. They are the servants. Some researchers call them the clowns. I would prefer the jesters. So they are indeed, they are performing with humor, but they're actually also giving advices, and they are the wise people actually in the play. They come always in the middle of the performance, and this is the time in Java is called goro-goro because you have the same structure in Javanese wayang kulit, the shadow puppet. They come in the middle, and this is the place where everything can be explained, every message can be delivered in a very blank manner. I mean, if Dalang has something to say to his audience, he's going to say it here, usually through the character of Cepot, the red one you see second on the right, who's kind of iconic for wayang golek in West Java. These messages are delivered through the voice of Cepot and depend on the context or possibly the sponsor. For example, you see here on the left side, Dalang has been mandated on the 5th of October 2019 in Pandeglang in Banten. It was a few months after tsunami that happened on the 2nd of January 2019, and the Indonesian National Board for Disaster Management, BNPB, asked Dalang to make a performance to deliver messages about how to avoid critical situations when tsunami is going to happen and so on. So it was a kind of socialization and education asked from the government to a special puppeteer who delivered the messages in a very, let's say, pedagogic way to his audience. So these messages are to be understood with reason and thoughts. But there is a second level, and this second level is how wayang works as a meta-discourse. This is to be found mainly in stories. So for example, stories tells us about the legacy of kingdoms, sacred objects that are acquired by heroes such as weapons or books and so on, mainly called pusaka, or divine powers also that can be acquired during the performance, or descendants of heroes and gods. So everything is about transmission in a way. And what do we learn here? We learn through the stories that there is no direct transmission. the transmission requires to put the heir to the test and to educate him before he can actually get what he is supposed to receive. It also requires a struggle. So struggle is a normal process for transmission and continuity, and the necessity of the present to interpret the past. We have a very emblematic story, I think, in Wayang for this. One of the old stories is taken from the Mahabharata from India and depicts Yudhishthira, who's the incarnation of the good king with his brother, the Pandava. And this good king has an attribute called Layang Jamuskali Musada. In Sunda, it is represented as a book, kitab, a book that actually guarantees the harmonious governance and the harmonious relationships with the population, with the people. Still, when the story is over and so on, Yudhishthira keeps the book and he goes on in kind of errands for years and thousands of years, not thousands, maybe hundreds of years, and he cannot find rest. He cannot die, basically. And he brings with him this book, Layang Jamuskali Musada. And actually he finds the solution the day he meets with Sunan Kalijaga, the one of the saints that spread Islam in Java. When Sunan Kalijaga told him what was the hidden meaning of Layang Jamuskali Musada. And the meaning of Layang Jamuskali Musada is actually Kalimat Shahadat, which is the profession of faith in Islam. So actually, beside the fact that you see a very interesting combination of Hindu and Islamic elements, what is interesting to see here is that Yudhishthira, the Hindu king from hundreds of years ago, couldn't die before he got the interpretation from that was the prison at that time, right? From the present interpretation of Layang Jamuskali Musada, which was an Islamic interpretation inside the Indonesian context. So I think it's a very, very interesting example. So that was the level 2, that is to understand through intertext, so the references with other things within the society, and interpretation. And the third level is actually about performing time. First, we have a very strong presence of the past within the performance, and it is not understood as the past. There are a few elements that are actually present just per se here, and that reminds of the existence of this past, and that remain relevant actually within the performance. So first, we have the evidence of historical layers. Basically, Wayang is presenting stories coming from Hindu context, from Hindu background, such as Mahabharata and Ramayana, reinterpreted with Islamic values and performed sometimes even more obviously as Islamic da'wah or Islamic preaching. So you have no, how can I stop it? Okay, well, just listen to it, it's not long. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, there is something I don't completely control about this thing, technology. So the evidence of this historical layers, and that was the second point actually, Kakawen. Kakawen are these small songs, such as the one you just heard before, sung in Kawin. So it's not, it's old Sundanese, it's Kawi, old Sundanese, old Javanese language that no one can understand right now. I mean, there are very, very few people who can understand it. Even Dalangs, puppeteers don't understand it, many of them. But they're here, people know what they mean, and they have a function within the performance. So actually, you can't get rid of them, and they're just marking the evolution of the performance. They can refer to the mood of the performance of the scene. They can refer to the mood of the character, and they indicate also if the character is meditating, if it's the beginning, if it's the end of the performance. So they are actually maybe not codes, but references that are very important within the performance that actually put the past directly within the present as an unavoidable presence to be here. And also, Wayang works as an allegory, not as categories, which means that it doesn't separate elements. It rather imbricates them, and you have a play of correspondences where you can have a small part referring to the whole part, and reversely the whole part meaning the small part. So this is very interesting also. In this part, this level, performing time, you also have the duration of the performance. That is very important. Performances have a duration of 8 hours. Well, had a duration of 8 hours before the pandemic, so I don't know how it's going to be after that, but basically they used to be 8 hours from 8 in the evening to 3 or 4 in the morning, and this time is mastered by the dalang, the puppeteer, so it's a very long time to be in, let's say. There is also a dramatization of the transformation process. Lislov said that wayang changes you physically, and it's true, because during this 8 hours you go through different, very different moods, emotions, and feelings. So actually, you're not the same before you start and after you leave. You have a very specific type of performance also that is called ruatan. Ruatan is used to cure, it's sometimes called exorcism. It's the purification of people and places. And in this particular performance, wayang is a ritual that has the ability to cure people and places. In this performance, the main character is called Batara Kala. He's a very terrible god who can eat human flesh, and is actually a kind of incomplete, sorry, the name is in Indonesian in my head, tubuh, body, who's not aware of his origin actually. Is the kind of representation, according to anthropologist Kati Basse, is a representation of the linear time that doesn't have any origin and goes on like this, and is opposed to the cyclical time you can find in the other temporalities of the performance, especially within the gamelan music that is built around cycles revolving around the big gong. I'm not going to go deeper here, but the idea is that this linear time is threatening, whereas the cyclical time is not. And it's threatening because it can fragment the person and the society. Still within the ruatan, an important element is the transformation of elements. So during the performance of the ruatan, you will see elements transforming themselves, and the people will also experience it. So you have the fire through the incense. Here it becomes smoke. You have the earth with the kris, which is made of minerals. You have the breath, the air, or the human breath, that becomes mantra or prayers, and you also have the water that becomes actually the actual way to purify people. So through the water, people are transformed, people are cured, and people are made safe and cannot be attacked by Batarakara. So it is at the same time the representation and the experience of permanence and impermanence. So finally, wayang works as a source and a resource. It reminds of what Elisabeth just stated earlier, that the collectivity is very important. Collectivity is built and recalled by the performance as a multisensory experience. So you have the acknowledgement of the collective past as a basis for interpretation and inclusion. The society is a solution. Being together is the solution. The experience of time and the continuous transformation is a modality for perenity and, again, for development. What we learn is how to handle with memory and time with wayang golek. So it works first as a source, as it is understood to be a practice that is at the basis of a society, but also a resource for it, because it gives clues to how to deal with many things. I think I will stop here because my time is over. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this presentation. It was very fascinating to see how the wayang golek can help understanding things, and how it helps understanding local cultures too. And we are so pleased to have you today. And so we are going to move on to our next presentation, our last presentation already. Um, I have many questions for Sarah and Elizabeth. I'm sure you all have some too. Just write them in the chat box. We'll answer them in a few minutes after the presentation of Bapak Punto. Bapak Punto, welcome to Pesta Sains. We are so pleased to have you tonight. Bapak Punto graduated from the UGM Yogyakarta in architecture and planning. He is now a researcher, a lecturer at Universitas Trisakti. Maybe some of your students are here tonight. And Bapak Punto is also an active member of Bumi Pelestarian Pusaka Indonesia. And he also works with several French researchers. And tonight he's going to talk about to what extent cultural heritage need attention during a natural disaster. So it will link to our two first presentations. Thank you so much, Bapak Punto, for being with us tonight.
Baik, terima kasih. Selamat malam. Can you hear my voice? Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah, baik. I share my screen. Oops. Yeah. Okay. So, selamat malam semua. Thank you, Pak Stefan, Pak Gutier. Thank you very much for Ivi for the opportunity, for giving me the opportunity to participate in this event. Yeah, Pesta Sains. I'm very honored. And also for giving me the opportunity to talk about the relation between disaster and cultural heritage. Although I teach at the Department of Architecture, Universitas Trisakti, I'm not a scholar in disaster, but as part of my work, with heritage organization Bumi Pelestarian Pusaka Indonesia, I had experience with disaster, especially the one in Yogyakarta, the earthquake in 2016. So the theme of my lecture will reflect on the relationship between disaster and the conservation of tangible heritage through the impacts of the 2006 Yogyakarta earthquake in Kota Gede in 2006. Kota Gede is a historical site, one of historical sites in Indonesia. And at that time, Kota Gede experienced major damage as the impact of disasters. So several heritage vernacular traditional buildings were collapsed or damaged. And at that time, there is not many attention from the government to safeguard, to protect, or to restore cultural heritage in Kota Gede. So I will start my presentations with this slide. So this is not to make a comparison between what happens in France or in Paris with what we have here in Indonesia. But I'm sure most of you know what the image is. This is the fire at the Notre Dame, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. It happens in 2019, April 15, 2019. The cathedral itself is a World Heritage Site, as is part of Paris banks of the Seine, inscribed already on the World Heritage List in 1991. So it's also our discussion, at the time 2019. It attract our attention, because after the event, so many attention giving to the cathedrals, and there was immediately a discussion regarding the best way to restore the cathedral back to its original conditions. I underline here is that it seems like in France, or in Paris, there is already a mechanism in doing the restorations of cultural heritage, especially tangible heritage after the disaster. Yeah. And this is the situation of World Heritage in general. Yeah. Although World Heritage already designated as World Heritage, it still has the possibility of decrease in the quality or the condition of maintenance, and also the decrease of the value of uniqueness, and it can endanger the condition of the World Heritage. And one of the threats is disaster. Yeah, it can be in the form of natural disasters, fires, disputes, yeah, wars, or other forms of negligence. And this is what we have in Indonesia. Indonesia is a supermarket of disaster. We have so many kind of disaster: fire, earthquakes, floods, and etc. It gave impact, yeah, to livelihood, buildings, and etc. It has also give impact, yeah, to cultural disaster, cultural heritage. But at the moment, not many attention giving, yeah, to the impact of disaster to cultural heritage. I gave you several images of the impact of disaster to cultural heritage. For example, the flood that happens in Kota Tua, Jakarta, the old town of Jakarta, and then the earthquake in 2009 in Padang, West Sumatra, and also fire in vernacular settlement in Gadang, West Sumatra, in Rumah Gadang, in West Sumatra, and also the impact of the volcano ashes to some temples in Jawa Tengah. This is also the example of what is the impact of disaster to cultural heritage. It was in West Sumatra, Padang, yeah. An earthquake hit Padang in 2009. So we did a damage assessment, yeah, to heritage buildings in Padang to see what is the impact of the earthquake to heritage building there. So from the total number of cultural heritage buildings that we assess, yeah, in Padang, at that time there were around 274 buildings, and sadly 129 of those buildings are heavily damaged, 77 moderately damaged, and 51 slightly damaged, and 70 buildings, only 17 buildings are in safe conditions. And after that, after the earthquake, Padang city government gave some fund, yeah, fund aid program to the building owners, but they gave no technical support, yeah, for the building owners. So in reality, those aid program gave no support for the restoration of these historical buildings in Padang. Okay, now, so ideally, disaster risk relates to cultural heritage. Yeah. In 2020, actually, the Indonesian Ministry of Culture created a campaign, yeah, of disaster resilient cultural heritage, or Cagar Budaya Tangguh. Disaster resilient cultural heritage is an effort, yeah, to place cultural heritage in disaster management. Disaster resilience cultural heritage should be able, yeah, to survive and recover immediately if it is hit by disaster, by following some stages of disaster management: pre-disaster, emergency, and post-disasters. So the campaign follows the cycle of disaster risk management cycle for cultural heritage sites, yeah, created by Rohit Chigiasu. So he is now an expert in ICROM, yeah, in Rome. It consists of 3 stages: pre-disaster, consists of risk assessment and risk prevention and mitigations, and then during disaster stage, emergency preparedness and response procedures, and after disasters consists of damage assessment, treatment, recovery, and rehabilitations. Chigiasu and Aurora also mentioned the principles in doing this disaster risk management. The first principle is understanding disaster risk to cultural heritage, and then understand impact on cultural heritage, yeah. So not only the physical, but also the use, and then doing the disaster reduction or mitigation, integration of mitigation in disaster risk management efforts, and cross-sectoral implementations. And by giving the example of Kota Gede, I want to show you how, if we apply this disaster risk management approach in Indonesian context. Okay, then Kota Gede 2016. Sorry, Kota Gede. The story of Kota Gede from the earthquake in 2006. This is Kota Gede. Kota Gede is in Yogyakarta. One of the historic sites in Yogyakarta was the former center of Islamic Mataram Kingdom in 16th century. It is now one of the Kawasan Cagar Budaya or Heritage District in Yogyakarta, or also Kawasan Pusaka. Yeah, it's located in two areas. So some part is in Yogyakarta area, the region Menangun, Purbayan, and Prenggan Kelurahan, and then some parts in Kabupaten Bantul, the Jagalan and the Singosaren village. So it is the former capital of Islamic Mataram Kingdom, founded by the first king of Mataram, Panembahan Senopati. Kota Gede means big city, so Kota city, and then Gede big. Also represents the Javanese ideal site and its unique characteristic. So the origin of Kota Gede can be proved by the existence of archaeological artifacts such as the Pasar Legi, Kota Gede, you see from the picture, and then the mosque, the Great Mosque of Kota Gede or Masjid Gede, and then also artifacts called the throne of Panembahan Senopati. So according to a researcher from Department of Archaeology Gajah Mada, Ibu Inayati, the structure of Kota Gede very similar with the structure of other Javanese old cities, such as Yogyakarta, present Yogyakarta, and Surakarta, and also other cities, Jepara, Kudus. Yeah, those cities have four components called Catur Gatra: Kraton or the palace, the mosque or the masjid, market or pasar, and alun-alun or the square. And aside those elements, urban elements of Kota Gede, Kota Gede also a house of hundreds of 200 years of traditional wooden houses with its unique shape of roof. Yeah, we have the joglo and then limasan and kampung. Joglo is, people say, the most unique traditional houses in Kota Gede or Javanese houses. The traditional house of Kota Gede with its unique roof shape is considered as folk heritage or heritage belong to community, because at the time until 2006 in Kota Gede, objects that considered as cagar budaya or heritage is, for example, the mosque. So this heritage is not yet considered as heritage by the government. Just to give you detailed information about the joglo, joglo is usually a complex of buildings which consists of the main buildings called dalem, and then open building or pendopo used to meet guests, and also two buildings located in the right and left side called gandok. Since 1998, as I said, several experts and also academia agree that Kota Gede is a historic area and joglo is folk heritage. And that Kota Gede needs to be conserved. And the restoration of the conservation of Kota Gede focus on the monuments, not only the monuments, the mosque, but also the characteristic of the environment, such as this alley, and then also the architectural heritage, such as the Kota Gede. Not only government is concerned on Kota Gede, but also some heritage organizations in Yogyakarta. For example, Jogja Heritage Society. Most of the members of Jogja Heritage Societies, they are lecturer, from Gajah Mada University and other universities in Yogyakarta. They also created some projects in Kota Gede, and because after the projects in Kota Gede, there are also heritage organizations built by the local people in Kota Gede, for example, the Kantil Foundations. So the awareness of local to conserve the heritage started with the projects made with the Jogja Heritage Society. Yeah, so 2006, the earthquake hit Kota Gede. Yeah, it was a powerful earthquake, but Yogyakarta and also Jawa Tengah, yeah, is actually has a record of having a disaster like earthquake. So according to research by Ika Putra, yeah, lecturer at Universitas Gadjah Mada, historically Yogyakarta's region has experienced a significant seismic of every like 60, 75 years. Yeah, so in the past 200 years, at least there were 3 earthquakes. So before 2006, there was also earthquake in 1876 and also earthquake in 1943. In the case of Yogyakarta in general, there are at least 4 types of architectural heritage that was impacted by the earthquake in 2006. The temples, and then also the Kraton, even the Kraton also get the impact of the disaster, and then colonial buildings and the Javanese traditional architecture, mostly in Kota Gede. So this kind of situation giving us information that there is always a risk, yeah, disaster risk for the conservation of heritage buildings in Jakarta and especially in Kota Gede. So this is what we have after the earthquake, especially in Kota Gede. A lot of buildings collapse or damage. The owners at least tried to save buildings from further damage, but at that time the government came to Kota Gede, give funding, but they said no money to preserve, to restore or to save joglo or these historic buildings, yeah, because they think too much. It will need a lot of money, yeah, to conserve or to restore these historical, these Javanese traditional houses. Okay. Okay. Yeah, but although there is no budget or money from the government to support the restoration or reconstruction of those damaged heritage buildings, Universitas Gadjah Mada in collaboration with other universities, yeah, in Yogyakarta, and also heritage organizations like Jogja Heritage Society agree to do something, yeah, to save heritage in Kota Gede. Yeah, they give problem also happens with the most of Kota Gede, but the government of Yogyakarta support the restoration, yeah, to save the most of Kota Gede, but no support for these traditional houses. So they agree, they made collaborations to save this heritage that they call folk heritage. This team started their work by assessing the level of damage of hundreds of traditional houses in Kota Gede. Yeah. So they collect information about the historical aspect, technical drawing, also damage detail of its buildings. Students, yeah, from those universities went to the field and did the assessments. Yeah. They also measured and interviewed the owner related to their wish, what they want, yeah, about the future of their traditional houses. Yeah, so this is the condition of those traditional houses in Kota Gede after the earthquake. Even in 2008, Kota Gede was declared as an endangered site by World Monument Fund. And the team also conducted damage assessment and reported the casualties. Yeah, and also they make a documentations, and then they share this information to find money to support the restorations. And finally, although hundreds of houses were damaged or collapsed, yeah, at least they can get some sponsor, yeah, to restore or to reconstruct some of those damaged houses, including from French company like Total also helped to support the restorations of these damaged and collapsed buildings. The first reconstructed house was the house belong Pak Koko. It's in Pringgan village, not far from Omah Loreng Pasar or the market, and also then the house of Pak Joko Nugroho, the famous Between Two Gates, and then Pak Edi Prianto, Pak Sudibyo Prasetyo, which were funded by the Dutch Royal government. So it can be made possible by collaboration and support from different and many international or local donors. And also interesting to see that the restoration is not only to protect or to keep the building as it is, but after the restoration, some buildings are also used as a public use, such as the house belongs to Pak Koko. Yeah, after restorations, the house is for public, so everyone can use this pendopo for public use. And not only architectural heritage, but also landmarks were able to restore, such as Babon Anim is a former electricity post located not far from the market, yeah, with the support from Total Indonesia, and then also guard posts or Pos Malang, and also Tugu Ngejaman. So the focus is not only about monument, but also for folk heritage, or what people believe as their heritage. Yeah, this is Pos Malang. Yeah. Also, there are several issues that need to be dealt. Yeah. What happened in Kota Gede? Why so many traditional houses were damaged or even collapsed? It's because there is no knowledge by the people, yeah, about the maintenance, and also some traditional houses are actually left empty because the owner are somewhere, yeah, to find better life, yeah, in other cities. So it is important, yeah, I see from the experience of this restoration in Kota Gede, that we need to also work with the community. And in the case of Kota Gede, the team Yogyakarta Heritage Society, Universitas Gadjah Mada, they work together with the people, and they work. They found or they are established organizations called Heritage District Conservation Organizations. So it is these organizations who then take the responsibility to have to proceed, yeah, the reconstruction process in Kota Gede. This organization is also finally supported, yeah, by the government of Yogyakarta. As so you can see, in 2019, the governor of Yogyakarta, Sultan Hamengkubuwono the 10th, yeah, signed a MOU to help the process of reconstruction of Kota Gede. Yeah, this is also interesting to pay attention. That's after the earthquake, yeah, because not many attention giving by the government for this kind of heritage. Yeah. The government of Yogyakarta at this time delivered fund aid program, yeah, to the affected houses. Yeah, also provided clearing service, yeah, for the people after the earthquake. But the service that delivered to the Kota Gede without proper considerations, yeah, and also supervisions. So you can see next to this traditional joglo, there is a new modern buildings. Yeah. So no harmony between the old and the new. And this is the example in how then the restored joglo is used by the community. And in brief, this is what happens in Kota Gede between 2006 and 2012. There are a lot of things, new knowledge, in not only about heritage related to disaster, but also to heritage conservations. We learn about how to do damage assessment, to work with the community, to build organisasi pengelola kawasan Kota Gede, and also we see that in the end, the government prepared a conservation master plan for Kota Gede, which include the issue of disaster risk in heritage conservations. Yeah, to close, this is some other issue in the future related to disaster and cultural heritage. So talking about disaster and heritage, actually according to our cultural heritage law, is already there. Yeah, so that the government and local governments have the task of carrying disaster management in emergency situations for objects, buildings, structures, sites, and area that already declared as cultural heritage. Yeah, government and also local government should provide support to cities or agencies experiencing disasters. But the guidance is not yet there, and also the action project by the government, especially from the cultural agency, is not there yet. So in many cases, after the disaster happens, we'll see that we lose so many heritage buildings. That's the situation, and it's very sad. There's also initiative by heritage organizations. They speak about the importance of to include heritage and also disasters. And we still have to see in how it can be realized or implemented. And to close, cultural heritage law and also this Indonesian Heritage Charter, for example, have been our references to relate disaster risk management to conservation efforts in Indonesia. And we need continuous socialization and training so that more and more parties can adopt and realize that cultural heritage conservation should be responsive to disaster risk, through policies, plan, and also programs. And we would like to learn, from many records of various experiences as our lesson learned in dealing with reduction and management of disaster risks for cultural heritage. Thank you, Pak Kuti.
Terima kasih, Pak Punto, for this very interesting and complete presentation. It's so fascinating how your three presentations complete each other on different aspects and at the same time connect very well to each other. So we are going to move to our question and answer session, as it's very important that everyone can discuss with our speakers today. Before moving on to the session, I would really like to thank, as Stéphane already mentioned, the FEO, École des Extrêmes-Orient, for the help in organizing and putting together our speaker tonight. Thank you, Hélène Nyoto. And we're going to start our questions. Maybe we'll start by a question maybe for Elizabeth. We have a question from Mathilde. Malam Ibu Elizabeth, how did you observe that people near Merapi were losing their local cultures before the eruption? Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you, Mathilde, for your question. So, for 20 years, I've been the anak angkat, the adopted child of Marijan, of the guardian of the Merapi. I was part of his family because I wrote a book in 1991, and about a myth. It was a dongeng, un conte, a fairy tale. I thought about a white banyan and a stone elephant, and it happened in a few years after the first eruption I experienced in Yogyakarta of the Merapi in 1994, that this white banyan and the stone elephant existed at a sacred site on the slope of the Merapi, just 500 meters from the sacred village, the Kinarjo village. I'm talking about the loss of culture in the village of Kinarjo, not all Merapi. Merapi is a huge mountain. There are millions of people living around, maybe 2 or 3 millions, I don't know. So, and I observed the decline because after this story appeared to be true, Marijan adopted me as one of his child. It meant that I recorded many of his dreams, his stories, and observed all what happened in the village. And slowly I saw the erosion, but not only myself. many friends of Mamarijan that were artists observed how some fundamentalist movement started to say that it's not fair, you should not, this is haram to make offering to the volcano, that you should not burn incense, that you should not sing mantra. Whereas Mamarijan was chosen, named by the Kraton of Yogyakarta, by the Sultan, to have this task, to conduct the task of the offering, you know. So he was trapped between this fundamentalism movement and his duty as part of the Javanese culture from the Kraton.
Recording stopped.
And then came also this so-called capitalist intrusion in the village, because when I wrote the book, I wanted to tip some books, to give him books to sell, and all the revenues will go to the villagers. But he said, I'm sorry, we don't sell anything in the village. And at that time, it was very true. It was a pure village, let's say, at least in the view of Mamarijan. And then suddenly, after many years, you know, this company came, the Jammu company, and offered him to buy his image. And Mamarijan sold his image, which meant he had to go to Jakarta, to there, and move from his duty as the guardian of the volcano. Was very distracted. He became a very famous person. All the Iklan were on television, on bus stations, everywhere. And so slowly, it's a long story. It's a very sad story. I wrote it in a book called Babat Nelo Kidul in Indonesian, published by Gramedia in 1915 or 16, I forgot, in 2015 or 16. And so, yeah, this is the story. Very sad, because I lost my father, in the eruption in 2010, because he refused to move from his village. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this answer. I'm sure it answers my question. We have another question coming from Rita. Bonsoir for Sarah. Bonsoir, Sarah. How being part of the UNESCO heritage helped Wayang Golek to be preserved?
Well, it didn't.
Oh.
Not because Wayang is not preserved and is in danger, but because Wayang already has the means to preserve itself. Actually, the proclamation by the UNESCO had the effect of unveiling what was at stake behind Wayang Golek, for Wayang Golek, yeah. I'm not talking about, I think it's the same actually for Wayang Golek too, but especially for Wayang Golek, it actually unveiled what was at stake behind. So who were the stakeholders beside the performers? The population, there are also the government, the sponsors, and many issues, political issues, mainly about decentralization, democratization, and all this stuff. So actually, Wayang is very relevant and was already very relevant when it was proclaimed. And it's true that the first proclamation in 2003 was based on the criteria of the emergency of acknowledgement in order to preserve the practice. But as a matter of fact, I think the main threat was more to be found in economical difficulties that the population would encounter, that was actually have an impact on how many people could afford inviting Wayang for their events. In terms of very material effect, yeah. If you don't have money, you cannot afford a Wayang Golek because it's very expensive. It's a whole troop of 30 people. You have to give food to everyone, so it's very expensive, and people could not afford it anymore after 97, 98, and also after 2008, 2010, after the subprime crisis. And of course, now with the pandemic, it's another story. But this is the most dramatic threat to Wayang, I think, because it is already very adaptive and very much liked mainly in the countryside, it is true, but it is very much like in the cities too, although it has to adapt to the urban way of life. And I could observe, starting from 2010, a true revival of interest for Sundanese arts in West Java, but I've heard that it's the same in other regions. I mean, people are more concerned about regional arts and identities than they were before. And it's also not only mere interest, I mean, just for the aesthetics of the shapes or something. It's all connected with decentralizations, kind of things. It could be too long if I continue, I think.
It's fascinating. Thank you, Sarah, for this answer. We have another question for you in Bahasa. Feel free to answer it in Bahasa if you want to. My colleague Stephanie will read it for you.
Actually, it's okay. I'm reading it here.
Oh, perfect.
Bagaimana
Thank you,
pendapat
Sarah.
Anda mengenai melakukan kegiatan kegiatan sosialisasi terhadap bencana alam di Indonesia melalui pertunjukan wayang. Saya kira hal ini pernah dilakukan di Gunung Kidul, Yogyakarta. Boleh Anda bagikan pandangan dan pengalaman Anda mengenai hal ini? Terima kasih. Actually, it's very good. Although I should refrain from giving values, but I think wayang has been used in this way for at least decades, if not centuries. So it's probably one of the best things we can do, because puppeteers have a very specific status within the society, especially within the rural society. There are people who are trusted. There are people who have very specific powers. There are references. They can influence people because they are able to touch their heart in a way. So giving them the job to socialize, to give information to the population is just one of the best things to do, I guess. Although it also refers to the New Order era when dalangs or puppeteers were actually enrolled to serve the government and give the information or the propaganda the government wanted to transmit to the population. But on the other hand, this is part of the intrinsic role of the dalang in a way. He's a mediator between population and government. So I think that if there are things to be conveyed, such as information about natural disaster, for example, wayang is a very good media, I would say.
Thank you, Sarah, for this answer. We have a question for Punto from Andin, who is stating that how important it is to respect and safeguard the cultural heritage through national laws and in international treaties, and is wondering how precisely the Indonesian government respond to protect the historical sites and cultural heritages.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mbak Andin. Yeah, I hope. It is true that our Indonesian government should give more response about the protection of historical and cultural heritage. Although our constitution and also we have law and cultural heritage that give mandate to do the protection and conservation of cultural heritage, but not many actions, because I think one of the reason is sometimes it's about money, and other reason is about innovations, in doing this conservation. Actually, Indonesian government we have already national laws and cultural heritage. We have the first one was in 1992, and then the new one in 2010. So our government tried to do it in a systematic way. Started from the designations and then registration, and also do the management, planning, and conservations. But not every city take it seriously. But I have to say that more and more, especially now, the awareness about the importance of heritage conservation is increasing. But also pay attention that we cannot just give the role to do that only to our government. because then we depend the conservation only on the official mechanisms. We need also to play a role, yeah. As I give example that nowadays there are a lot of heritage organizations and communities that give attention to heritage, the protection and conservation of cultural heritage. Thank you, Pak Guti.
Thank you, Pak Punto. We have another question from Helen, who is wondering actually if Kota Gede was a cornerstone in the understanding and improvement of disaster management generally in Indonesia, and if the conservation master plan method of Kota Gede could be used for other places and situations.
I have to say that I agree with you. Yeah, what happens in Kota Gede is one of the first initiative, yeah, to relate heritage management and cultural heritage conservations, yeah, in a systematic way. But sadly, the effort to continue the process to encourage the integrations between disaster and cultural heritage doesn't happen. Yeah. So we have the example from Kota Gede, we have example from Padangs, but the discussion doesn't continue to happen. So one day we have another case, for example, in Palu, and the discussion is actually already stops. Yeah. So sadly, that happens in Kota Gede. So we cannot just say that what we have in Kota Gede can be a references for other cities. We have to keep develop the knowledge about how to integrate this disaster issue and cultural heritage conservations. Thank you, Mbak Helen.
Thank you, Pak Punto. We have a question for Elizabeth coming from Rosan Kaya Utami. Maybe Ellen, you can see Elizabeth. Sorry, you can see it in Bahasa. Oh, I think you're muted for now, Elizabeth. We can't hear you, I think.
Who did you mention? Because there are so many now.
Coming from Rosan Kaya Utami. Selamat malam, apakah sebaiknya?
Apakah sebaiknya ada langkah-langkah kursus atau pembeda untuk memahami kesiapsiagaan bencana antara suku pedalaman dan masyarakat kota desa pada umumnya? Untuk memahami, I'm not sure I understand the question. Is it different to make aware the people that are the suku pendalaman, the ethnic people, or the people in the city? I'm not sure about the question. Maybe I'm sorry.
Maybe if I could add, maybe the difference between the people in the village, as you already presented, and the people in the city, as we who live in Jakarta. Maybe there is a difference to give socialization of prevention of natural risks.
Oh yes. I don't think so, yeah, because the danger is the same when when your house collapse, so I think it's about the same. The only thing we may be optimistic and believe that in the village they are more prone to listen to the ancient mythology and stories. In the city, maybe not so anymore, so you have to resort to other tricks, yeah, maybe, I don't know, yeah. In the villages, there was another question asking how you can make the children aware of natural disasters, and that's what we did in Bencana in the village. We wrote a book together. It was sponsored by the Institut Français Indonesia at that time. And it was the myth of Sapu Jagat, the spirit in the Merapi, who comes down because he's supposed to clean up all the dirt, not just in the Merapi, but the dirt of all the humanity, you know. And he comes down to meet Ratu Kidul, the queen of the stars, who lives in the sea, and also who produced some small tsunami, you know. That's Ratu Kidul. That's why it's dangerous to go in the South Sea, because if you bath there, she may take you. But in fact, there are small tsunami because there are volcanoes under the water in the Indian Ocean on this part of Java, on the coast, on south coast. So they gave just a name to the tsunami. They call it the Queen of the South, Ratu Kidul. So I think by telling again those stories, yes, it can very much help. And I think maybe children in a village might be more interested in the cities, but maybe not also. They might be also very interested. So I don't think there are so much differences. Maybe also in the village, they can rebuild their house in a more natural way, but you know what happened? Usually they don't want. They just want to rebuild even worse than before, more cement, more iron, more, you know. They don't want to have bamboo houses because it looks back road, and so this is very difficult. Yes, so I don't know. I think it's about the same problem, I would say. Thank you, Rosanne, for your question.
And thank you for your answer, Elizabeth. We have a new question for Sarah too. Sarah, coming from Hélène, could you elaborate on Wayang Golek performances as a tool to prevent Javanese prophecies or natural signs announcing disasters? What are the main repertoires used for this?
Well, actually, for Wayang Golek, I have knowledge of none, to be honest, because disaster appear as a state. Usually it happens at the beginning of the performance, like it's the kingdom is flooded, or this is happening, but it's not. It is not. We don't have the moment before that. So actually, it's not exactly teaching about it. Maybe there are different indications in Wayang Kulit, because Wayang Golek is relatively young compared to Wayang Kulit. Okay, Wayang Golek emerged in the 15th century and has been widely used by the Sudanese population starting from the 19th century. So actually, maybe there is no such huge memory of disasters recorded in Wayang Golek, and or maybe it's not expressed, it's not emphasized in the performances of Wayang Golek as much as it is with Arikandi Wayang Kulit, which I don't master, I'm afraid. But I remember a performance that took place not long after what is the English term for this? The quick flood. I mean, when the water of the river is coming out very suddenly. And I remember the Dalang advising the people to remain aware of the signs of the situation in the river and to take notice of any little change of level. And this was just in the aftermath of this event. It was in West Java too, but it was not the same place of the performance. But everyone had still this event in the head, and he would talk about it. But it was not included inside the Lakon, the story. I mean, it was not described nor treated as per se inside the story. Sorry, it's a disappointing answer.
No, thank you, Sarah. It's good to know. And another question for Elizabeth, coming from Hélène. It's right that Elizabeth, you mentioned how the eagles helped Bamarijan to know that the Merapi eruption was coming. And Hélène is wondering if you learned, if Bamarijan taught you how to look at how to prevent eruption.
Thank you, Hélène, for the question. In fact, it's not Bamarijan who told me about the eagle. It was from another village. we made a conference in the IFI, Institut Français, maybe 2 years after the eruption, I forgot, and some villagers explain about the eagles. So I learned. So I don't know, in Kinarjo, I never heard this story from Bamarijan, but what he told me, yes, they used to listen to the noise. They could, identified if it was the storm, the thunderbolt, halilintar, or if it was the sound of the volcano. They were very clever, and they would sit at night and listen carefully, smoking, drinking tea and coffee, discussing anything. So this was one of their way, to really be aware. And there were also some animals coming down, like the monyet, the monkeys, but there are almost no more monyet, so on the volcano, so no more sign. And but I think the main thing for Bamarijan was to think that an eruption is not a disaster, that the Merapi is not Mara, is not en colère, is not, it's just a life. And so that's why we just have to be aware and move on the side when he wants to erupt. But the problem is that Bamarijan became so blind, that he couldn't believe that an eruption will come, or there might be many other reasons why he didn't move. We don't know. He died, and taking away with him this secret, it's a secret. But what happened that he didn't see the eruption coming. That's for sure, because many people were still with him in the house when almost the village was destroyed, and he refused to move, and he died in the eruption. So, but for him, so maybe that's the reason also. For him, it was not a disaster. Maybe his destiny was to die in the eruption. But the problem is that other villagers died, that because they believed, they trusted him, that he could see the eruption coming. And they died, together with him. So that's more problematic.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your answer. We have two last questions. One for you, Elizabeth, coming from Panissa, who is wondering, in parenthèse, existe-t-il l'impact sanitaire causé par l'éruption du Merapi sur les habitants jusqu'à aujourd'hui? Is there an impact of the eruption still on the inhabitants near Merapi?
Yes, the impact is that, so Kinarjo was about 4 kilometers from the summit, so they had to move to a safer place, not because they were first they were very scared. They said they moved, and because they were just about 30 people who died. All the others survived because they moved before to refugee camps. And then the relocation, first they said we don't want to come near than 15 kilometers because the second eruption went 15 kilometers. So we found a land. We organized what we call disaster tourism with them. We transformed Kinarjo in a village, in a disaster destination for Christmas and New Year. But the villagers was handling all the revenues, and with this money they could buy a land about 11 kilometers far from the summit. Finally, the government gave them back the money, but they wanted first to make sure that they would buy the land and keep the land up. They wanted to keep the land of the village. So they thought if the government give them a new land, they will lose the other land. So that's why they bought it first. And then finally, the government, of course, financed all the building of the new village, Karamkendal. And now I don't go anymore there because it has become a tourist destination with, I don't know, I said 500 jeeps every day climbing the Merapi. And so I don't want to blame them because the jeeps bring them more money than the cows they used to have, so we cannot judge them. But it's what is true, it totally changed. They were facing the volcano up the summit before, living within the forest, finding food for the cows. And now they live facing the valley, the city, the tourists, the jeeps, the development. So it's a huge change for them. Yeah, it's a yeah. So, but they might be more happy like that. They make more money for sure. They are more. So it's you should ask them what they like better. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Vanessa, for your question. What a big change indeed. We have a last question for Pak Punto.
Baik Pak Punto, izinkan saya untuk membacakannya.
Yeah.
Bonsoir, saya ingin menanyakan apakah dengan melibatkan partisipasi dari internal masyarakat untuk peduli terhadap isu bencana masih bisa dilakukan secara masif, mengingat mitigasi bencana dan pengetahuan masyarakat yang masih terbatas. Tadi juga Bapak sudah menyebutkan bahwa there is no knowledge from the people. Bagaimana pendapat Anda? Terima kasih.
Okay. This is uniquely for me or also for other speakers? But if I can answer these questions, of course, yeah. In terms of, in the context of not only disaster issue, yeah, but also cultural heritage, participation is a must, yeah. Because who owns the cultural heritage is the community, yeah. When I said sometimes there is no knowledge from the people, then we need to encourage them, encourage community, yeah, to share their story. Then we should manage the story, because actually it is the community who knows what they have, including the experience with disaster. Yeah, if perhaps in some cases they forget about their experience with disaster, we should facilitate them. It will be part of their mechanism, ya, in dealing with the disaster issue. Begitu Pak or Ibu Afifka. Thank you Pak Guti.
Terima kasih Pak Punto. Thank you everyone. Thank you Stefan Dover. Thank you Elizabeth Inandiak. Thank you Sarah Andrieux, and thank you Punto Wijayanto for this amazing event. It was so fascinating, and I feel like we missed the webinars and the conference in presence at our Institut Français to talk more and more about these questions, and I'm sure we will organize them very soon when the situation enables us. Thank you again to everyone for attending our event. We also have webinars tomorrow and on Wednesday for Pesta Sains that will be more on volcanology tomorrow, two amazing talks tomorrow, and also on Wednesday, more about tropical forest. Thanks again to everyone. I wish you a very nice evening or good afternoon if you're in France. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Terima kasih semua. Bye-bye.